Jesus said, my kingdom is not of this world. All the kingdoms of the world operate on the method that we saw Satan wanted to use in Isaiah. A ruling elite exploiting and taking from the masses. Whether you go back to the pharaohs of Egypt, the emperors of China and Japan, the Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome, the nation states of Europe, the popes, all of them operate on this system of a ruling elite that takes from and taxes the masses to sustain them. And then there was a government that arose with lamb-like horns that was purposely constructed to give power to the masses and obstruct a ruling elite from taking control. The United States Constitution. Written exactly the opposite, where the people held the power. And ever since its institution, it has been under attack. The Constitution, not the nation, the Constitution, the principles of the Constitution, by the ruling elites in this world, and ultimately Satan behind them. And for the enlightened Christian who understands that Revelation talks about one time, at the end of time there will be a ruling elite, one world government that will exploit and dominate the masses again, that the single most important legal obstruction to that is the U.S. Constitution. It is the single most worldwide. And it's also why this particular nation will be the nation that leads the world in forming the beastly system. Why? Because as the methods of God have been established in the liberties, freedom of press, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of conscience, and power to the people, those godly principles, when you understand godly principles and you practice them, you always get stronger. You always get healthier. And as a nation practices those principles, that nation gets stronger. And the U.S. nation, to the degree they practice those principles, above all the other nations, has become the dominant nation in the world. And thus it has the power and strength for when the Constitution is finally invalidated or pushed aside, it has the power and strength then to lead the world into this system. But the Constitution stands in the way. And the Constitution is under attack in America right today. Yeah. The right to bear arms, under attack. You understand the right to bear arms, written into the Constitution, was not designed to protect you from the murderer and the thief in the community. Its primary purpose in the Constitution was to protect the masses from an authoritarian government, the ruling elite. That was its primary purpose. And for those without discernment, they read about the mass shootings and the murders of people against people, and they think that the society would be better off by taking away the citizenry's weapons. In reality, it's a step toward invalidating the freedoms and the power that the people hold in establishing a ruling authority, a ruling elite. What about the freedom of speech? Is the freedom of speech under attack in this country?
You'll have to get rid of the Second Amendment to get rid of the first one.
And how about freedom of religion? Is it under attack? How about freedom of the press? Is it under attack?
From within.
It's under attack from multiple different directions. But the point is, you will see a process happening in America. And I would encourage Christians to stop looking left and right.
Amen.
Amen. Stop looking left and right. Satan's playing you. He's pitting left against right, and there's a purpose for it. The devil's methods are the methods of lies, fear, and selfishness. What I see happening in the world is that fear is being incited on both left and right. Right is doing things that are inciting fear in left. Left is doing things that are inciting fear in right. Both sides are becoming more fearful. And what does fear drive people to do? Act in love or protect self? And as we protect self, what do we need to do to those who are the threat?
Bring them to heel.
Eliminate them in some way. Control them. In other words, take away liberties. Take away freedoms from those who we see not doing it our way. Whether it's left taking from the right or right from the left. And so you'll see that both sides now are presenting the other side as an existential threat. Existential. Threat to your existence. They both are arguing from the left and right. Both of them are arguing right now that the liberties of the Constitution is under attack. If you've been watching anything on the impeachment stuff, all the impeachment managers from the left are arguing that Trump is threatening our Constitution. And all the people on the right that are defending him saying, and the left's attack is a threat on the Constitution. Both are arguing that the other is threatening the Constitution. If it's not the Constitution, it's our freedoms. If it's not our freedoms, it's our actual integrity as a nation. If it's not our integrity as a nation, well, it's the whole world because of climate change. And if we don't make these things, then when the whole world's going to... And thus they're inciting this fear. We must survive, survive, survive. And how are we going to do it? When you get fearful and need to survive, well, we have to kill those on the other side or control them. And so we're moving from both sides, urgency, 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 get power, get power, get power. We've got to get the reins of power.
Well said.
Both sides are driven by the principles of fear and selfishness and the imperial law system. And sadly, most Christians accept the idea that God's law works like human law, and therefore it's right to pass laws to force your way.
Tim,
Yes.
I submit that there is some rationale for that, simply because of that text in the New Testament that says God established human governments for the purpose of...
Okay, pause. No, start over. There's some rationale in that. In what? There's rationale in us seeking to control and kill the other side?
No, it's...
So in what?
Let's go back to the idea that our Constitution supports the fusion of powers, separation of powers.
Okay.
All right? So I'm just saying that people have voluntarily given up their quote-unquote rights to governments which they believe have the power to control those who wish them wrong.
All right, so that's why I had to clarify.
Right.
Okay, because it almost sounded like you were defending this idea of fear, and let's destroy the other side. No, what he's articulating is this idea out of Romans where it is healthy to surrender some liberties to the organized government as long as what's surrendered enhances your capacity to develop and grow and does not restrict your autonomy and ability to grow. For instance, traffic laws. We surrender the absolute freedom to drive our car anywhere, any way, and at any speed we want. We surrender that absolute freedom to... Pardon? We do. We surrender the absolute freedom to drive anywhere, any way, and any speed we want to the laws and the authorities that enforce those laws. And by surrendering that absolute freedom to that structured government, it allows us to avoid injury, which enhances our personal development and health. That type of law, and the same thing with food inspections and water safety inspections and all the other types of structure, that type of personal surrender, so that we can't sell food prepared in any old way that has to meet certain health standards. Okay, medications and many other things that we do in society, these types of laws are appropriate because they enhance individual liberty, autonomy, and personal development. So that's the principle that God was suggesting in Romans. So thank you for that. If you've read my blogs over the last couple of weeks, you see how some of the responses that have been given on the Facebook page have been evidence that there's a lot of fear out there. There's a lot of fear out there, a lot of hurt. And a lot of animus, anger, fear that they'll lose their ability and their freedoms. And this often leads to loss of reasoned and evidence-based discourse and just shouting the other side down. Silence the voices we don't want to hear. Run away and flee. I've had a few people on our Facebook page that articulated that they'd been longtime followers of this ministry and had been blessed so many ways that they said in the posting how our ministries helped them grow in their love with God but this one posting, they have to leave our ministry and never visit again. One blog. Thousands and thousands of things on our site that have blessed them. One idea they don't agree with, and they must run away. Several people posted that. Run away. Why? Why do we have to run away from ideas that make us uncomfortable? It sounds very much like Peter at Pentecost when he's presenting ideas that the leadership didn't like. And what did they want to do? Use methods to silence him. You know, the truth can afford to be fair, folks. We can listen to ideas that disagree with ours, evaluate them in light of evidence and truth, and just have a loving discourse. We can love people who have different views on various topics in society. It's okay. We don't have to be threatened by that. I don't have to be mad at a person who actually believes that smoking cigarettes helps them breathe better. And then you substitute that with anything you think in society is a policy violation. You don't have to hate people who have a different view of things, because it becomes self-evident over time. Violations of God's designs are always injurious. Moving towards God's principles are always restorative and healing.
Don't you think too many people have bought into the idea that life is a zero-sum game where if I don't grasp power, then you're going to abuse me. If I have power, I won't abuse you. I'll just do what's right for you.
And you notice the methods being employed, and the mindset, and the understanding of how reality works, and the lack of understanding of how love, truth, and freedom works, and the lack of trust in a sovereign God to oversee and overrule the abuses of people. Look at how, we're talking about Daniel. Look at how Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had their freedoms and liberties abused. And look how God overruled. Look how Joseph had his liberties. Look how God overruled, because they trusted him.
It's interesting how extremely polarizing the last election is, and how society has become much more polarized since the last election cycle. If you don't believe as they did, that you'll get ostracized as you were going to over just who you liked and didn't.
I will tell you that I have had, let's move away from the society for a moment, and just tell you that I deal with lots of families, relationships, in which in the family dynamic, an individual has been crossing boundaries. They have established through multiple different mechanisms, temper tantrums when they don't get their way, that people in the home begin to give in to them. Let's give a child example. You tell your child not to have a piece of candy, and they have a temper tantrum. If you don't let me have some candy, I'm going to hold my breath. And so you say, oh, don't hold your breath. Please don't make a scene here. Have 2 pieces. And the child smiles and calms down. And then this goes on for years. Whenever they don't get their way, they have and you give in to what they want. Okay? The child is actually acting very maturely, and the action of the adult, now, you can replace this child example with married couple. Amen. Okay? Where one, instead of, I'm going to hold my breath, I'm going to rage, I'm going to slam doors, I'm going to attack you verbally, call you names, and the other person, instead of confronting this unhealthy behavior and say, this isn't an act of love, and I find that because I love you, I can't go along with this, the act of love. I must confront you with truth in a gracious way and say, you know, you've got an anger problem, and your heart is not being benefited by treating me in this way. And if this goes on, I can't in love stay here because it destroys you as well as mistreats me. Okay, this is a loving. Instead, they go along because they want peace. They want to be a peacemaker. And they become that codependent person. And then, when they come to see me, and I teach them the principles of God, and they begin to establish a healthy boundary. For years of tolerating it and allowing the mistreatment to go on, when they finally stand up and say, no, I cannot go along with the verbal abuse anymore, do you think it gets better or does it get worse? Worse. The person who's in the wrong gets enraged. The person who's in the wrong blows up. The person in the wrong who has their hand in the cookie jar goes into a tirade. And then when you look in society, when these same processes are happening, you can tell who's in the wrong. When they get called on it, they don't have a reasoned discourse. They go into a rage. They go into a riot. They begin shouting down. They don't want to hear opposition voices. And so you can look diagnostically and see which side is really in the wrong on this thing that's happening in our division right now. See, the persons that are calling these boundaries and saying, wait a second, you've been pushing things that are not yours to push. Yeah. And the other side gets really mad because they've been doing it for so long, they feel like it's theirs. Feel like it's their right to do it. And this is always a balance in society. Where does love draw the line in personal responsibility while respecting the liberty of a person who wants to do and live things differently? It's always been a struggle.
What about within the church?
And within the church. The Christian who has Christ in their heart, though, does not live in fear. We're not threatened if somebody calls us and says, hey, I think you're stupid and wrong because you believe in Jesus Christ. Well, that's okay. You're free to think that. I don't get threatened by that at all. I don't have to act in rage in that. You can see this on religions. Back in, I think it was the 70s, some artist took a cross, I think it was, and put it in urine. It might have been a Bible. Cross or Bible? Cross. It was a cross.
Crucifix.
Yeah, crucifix. Crucifix, not just a cross, crucifix with Jesus on it, and put it in urine. And how did the Christian community respond? With verbal criticisms and verbal statements of this is offensive, and this is wrong, and this is sacrilegious. There was no violence. There was no threats. There was no attacks of this person. Because Christians can be at peace knowing in their heart they love Christ, and they can actually feel sad for this person who is rejecting Christ. Father, forgive them, they don't know what they're doing. Try to do that with the Quran and see what happens. Seriously. And it's diagnostic of the other side. And I would say, politically, folks, I don't care whether you're left or right, if somebody challenges your ideas and you are so emotionally offended or hurt and angry that you need to respond with methods of coercion, intimidation, violence, shouting down, criticism, it's diagnostic of something in your heart. From the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. The good man brings forth good out of the good stored up in him, and the evil man brings forth evil out of the evil stored up in him. I don't care what side you're on. And our goal as Christians is, regardless of a particular view on a particular policy, can you present it in love and leave people free? That's the process. So understanding God's design laws, when we live in harmony with His design, we can't avoid the benefits. We grow healthier, we advance in wisdom, we get greater discernment. But when we violate God's design laws, it says in Romans 1, the mind becomes darkened, depraved, and futile. And we become these violent people. Read what he writes to Timothy about the last days and what the people are going to look like and all the different types of abuses and violence and disrespect to authorities and parents and things that go on. You can't avoid. That's where you'll end up if you reject truth and God's principles. Monday's lesson, boy, we're only getting to money. I have so many good things to go through today.